Thank you for listening to Taking Up Space. We would like to emphasize that taking up space is not a substitute for speaking with a licensed therapist or physician. We hope to encourage discussion around the topics brought up throughout the show. The views and opinions expressed are the speaker's own. We can only speak from our perspective, and we encourage you, as our audience, to listen to all of the perspectives shared here with an open mind and heart, and then form your own. The content discussed in this episode may be troublesome for people to hear. Before, during, and after listening to the episode, please make sure to practice some self-care activities, however that looks for you. Some of our favorite methods here at Taking Up Space include journaling, going for a walk, connecting with a loved one, eating a good meal, or just taking a few deep breaths and some time for ourselves. If you find yourself in any distress after this episode, please contact a licensed clinician or a crisis line for support. If you need any help connecting to crisis supports, we do have information listed on our website, BIPOChealingcenter.ca. Hello, welcome to the first episode of Taking Up Space. We are the BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center, located in the Gardner neighborhood by the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. We're excited to share our thoughts and perspectives with you about the intricacies around mental health in the BIPOC community with respect to different factors such as systemic issues and accessibility, as well as sharing our own experiences and stories. This podcast is reflective of what we've listened to and learned from our community, and we welcome you to chime in and share your thoughts with us. So we'll start off by introducing ourselves, and then we'll share a little bit more about the center.
So my name's Rehana. My pronouns are she and her. I completed my Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology at MacEwan, and I'm currently working towards my master's degree in counseling at Yorkville University, and I'm completing my practicum at the BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center. So one of the reasons why I wanted to work at the BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center is that I was really looking for a space that acknowledges systemic oppression, and this is something that really stood out to me with the BIPOC Center. My family is actually from Guyana, and both of my parents are immigrants. My dad immigrated here when he was 13, and my mom moved to the US when she was 6 years old. So we do have ancestral roots in India and Algeria, and there is actually a history of slavery that also occurred. My ancestors were basically taken from India and North Africa to come and work in the Caribbean, and that kind of unfolded like a path of like oppression and different things that kind of seeped into my family's bloodline, and all of the generational trauma that occurred from that. I still feel like I'm kind of working through understanding that historical and generational trauma, and so that's kind of the journey that I'm on right now. And it's nice to work alongside people who are also kind of on the same path, on the same journey. I currently like to work with attachment theory with my clients. I'm learning a lot about narrative therapy and emotion-focused therapy, which I really enjoy so far, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more on my way, and I guess that's pretty much it. I'll pass it on to Crystal.
Thanks, Rehana. Like Rehana said, my name is Crystal, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm Indian. I was born in India, then I lived in the States for a bit, and I moved to the land now known as Canada about 10 years ago. I have a BSc in neuroscience and a BSc in psychology, but I've also worked in the nonprofit sector focusing on anti-racism initiatives for the past few years. One of the main reasons I wanted to get involved with the BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center was because I thought it would be a good way to blend these two parts of my life together. Being an immigrant, there's a lot of blending of different parts of your identity depending on where you are. And this center is a place that encourages and emphasizes authenticity. When I met with Reena, the center's founder, I knew that she was not only creating a space that's absolutely necessary for the community, but it's also a space that's going to make our community better. I wanted a chance to be a part of that and to help our community. I strongly believe that connection is necessary for our individual and public health, and this center is one way to improve our connections. So Reena, thank you again for letting me be part of the stream, and now I'd love to pass it over to you to share a bit about yourself and how you came up with this idea.
Thanks so much, Crystal and Rehana, for introducing yourselves. So I'm Reena Samra. My pronouns are she and her. And I just wanted to start off by naming just some important aspects of who I am that I really wanted to share with our audience. I realized that in founding this center, I've kind of put a lot of information out there about what we stand for, and I haven't really done a lot of naming and identifying myself. I've kind of stayed a bit behind the scenes. So I come from a background of being Punjabi Indian. So my parents are both immigrants. So I'm a settler on this land. My mother immigrated to Canada when she was very young, and my father immigrated as an adult. So I grew up with a lot of stories about immigration, about the struggles of my family in navigating life in Canada. So growing up, we really struggled a lot with like poverty, and I noticed a lot of the ways that the system failed my family. So I saw a lot of struggles with mental health, addictions, intergenerational trauma in my family, and the ways that the system really didn't help to support folks in my family with their healing. And so I kind of grew up really aware of these inequities that were happening around me. It really fostered a passion for social justice that I've carried throughout my life. And as I've been on my healing journey, I've really worked a lot on like healing intergenerational trauma cycles and really trying to like show up as my authentic self and be kind of a better version of myself. So I want to name that I've been connecting a lot over the past few years with my racial identity and understanding more about the history of colonialism and genocide and harm that happened in Punjab, in India, where my family originates from, and really kind of connecting those roots to some of the experiences that I saw folks in my family go through when I was growing up. And so I've really kind of started to trace a lot of origins and make sense of why people in my family have experienced what they did, why I also experience intersectional aspects of my identity and the ripple effects that I've really seen come from this generational trauma. So I want to name that I do experience my own mental health struggles, my own neurodivergence, disability. I have a queer identity, and a lot of these parts have kind of shaped and formed like these layers of what I do experience in the world. And it really fostered this passion for understanding intersectionality, how multiple layers, overlapping pieces of oppression can really like work together to marginalize us and impact what we experience in the world. I started to take this lens into the work that I was doing. And I started out studying psychology early in my university journey, realized that it was not kind of meeting those, like it wasn't putting in those pieces that I was experiencing from my lived experience. It felt so individualistic, and it was missing a lot of like what I saw was the systemic or the community aspects around me that impacted my communities. And so I noticed that more of a systemic lens was important to bring to help heal my communities. I ventured into like studying social work, and then from there was able to get a bachelor's and a master's in social work. Started really focusing on other folks who had immigration stories, working with racialized people in the community, noticing how there were a lot of gaps in addressing race and culture in the mental health systems that I was involved in, working in nonprofits, working in advocacy, and noticing, okay, like there really aren't resources that address these pieces. So I started to get really interested in creating more safer spaces for racialized people to gather, to share our stories with each other. I have noticed that in my own experience, storytelling has been really healing, really connecting with my roots and understanding stories from my grandma and from my family members has been very valuable for me. So I wanted to gather people together to be able to see and hear each other in the fullness of who we are, really kind of like hold a space for things that maybe we don't always get the chance to talk about in our day-to-day, in the mainstream. And so once I finished with my master's degree, I really focused on holding BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color specific spaces. And it was out of these spaces that really I was able to see that, okay, there's something really healing that comes from when we gather, when we spend time with each other. We might have different cultural backgrounds, different racial experiences, and that's all a part of how white supremacy has worked in this world, has kind of ranked us as racialized people and separated us from each other, pitted us against each other. And I was really curious about what would it look like if we had an actual like healing space to gather and recognize that, okay, we've had different experiences, maybe some similar experiences to some common themes that don't get talked about. What if we actually talk about these things that impact us, about what it's like to adapt to like a new country, what it's like to leave behind your homeland and your cultures, what it's like to have your peoples and your history erased, what it's like to be on the receiving end of colonial violence, and kind of these common threads of the generational traumas that a lot of us who are racialized experience due to like what has happened and the colonialism that has impacted our peoples. So it was in these spaces that I really started to get feedback that, okay, this is much needed. There's not a lot of spaces where we can gather away from whiteness, where we can be truly ourselves and just, say what we've experienced. So it was in these group spaces. In particular, I started running a BIPOC grief group. And the feedback that I got from folks who were in the group was that, okay, this is actually really important for us to have these spaces where we can actually just be ourselves authentically. And, this group is amazing, but also we need something more than this, not just a group. What if we were to do this on a bigger level? And it really, what came up to fruition out of that group was, okay, like, what if we have an intentional space carved out that is for folks from, different racialized backgrounds, so that we can actually address and see color, see culture, see our identities, and actually like name what has happened and what we have to walk through kind of day in and day out. And so that's where BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center was born. I was really inspired from community, and through my journey as a social worker, that's been my kind of like grounding principle, is like, by the people, for the people, really being rooted in relationships and caring about people's stories, that we're not just numbers, we're not just, we're not just people who utilize services. We are so much more. There's like richness in our histories, there's vibrancy in our communities, there's excellence, and there's pain and suffering as well. And how do we honor all of that? And, it really made sense to kind of create a space for this. So that's a little bit more about why I decided to start this center. Really, I had no clue what I was doing when I first put this together. It just all came out of this, like, I think, like, love for the people that I was working with, and also a lot of like rage about the mistreatment that folks experience. And as I've really kind of dived deeper into racial justice movements, it really fueled a lot of that rage of, okay, like this is something needs to be done here, something different than what has been happening. These systems were not made for us. How do we reclaim and make something that is for us, by us? And I really think that rage kind of mobilized me into action. I felt a lot of shame historically for my anger as a little brown girl, having to be nice and agreeable and kind of cater to the people around me. So in venturing to launch the center, I realized, okay, you know what? It's okay to use this anger to like mobilize into action and launch something that's really meaningful, that can really like see people in the ways that I know I've always needed to be seen, in the ways that I've only really like gotten to be seen within intentional community. And, you know, I'm really grateful to be here sharing and really kind of deepening into like this intentional community that we are curating and reflecting the voices of the people in the community, voices that don't get heard, that we are going to amplify as we go along in this podcast journey. So thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Reena, about where the idea for the center came from. And Rehana, I'm sorry, I'm going to speak for you, but I know that we're both so grateful for the space, and I'm sure there's so many people in the community that are, and, you know, this is definitely something that the community needed, and you were able to see that, and yeah, I'm really glad that the space exists. I am curious, though, because I remember when I first learned about the space, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Why did you choose the word BIPOC? Because I know there's so much controversy around it, and just where do you have a reason for choosing the word BIPOC? I'm sure, knowing you, I'm sure that it was meticulously planned out and there's a very good reason behind it. But yeah, can you share that with me?
Yeah. So, in kind of deciding like what to encompass this kind of work of like the vision of how I wanted the center to go, I was starting to think about, the ways in which we as racialized people often get like defined by the world around us in terms of our identities, being taught and told what our identities are, what it means, and never really kind of getting the chance to perhaps like actually like decide that for ourselves. So I got really curious about the term BIPOC because you know, it's been circulating around since like the early to mid like 2010s, but I really started to see it being utilized a lot on social media around like 2020, around the time of like George Floyd's murder and in kind of like racial justice movement. And it was kind of, I think, a way that like the Western world really like broke through and started paying more attention in the mainstream to like long-standing police brutality against Black people for a long time. And so this kind of word BIPOC was being used to really kind of center, you know, instead of just saying like people of color, to really center that systemic racism does not impact all of us who are racialized in the same way. And that in particular, Black folks and Indigenous folks have been disproportionately targeted and harmed by these systems. And it seemed to be a way to really like center those experiences and kind of like differentiate that from just like lumping us all into one category. So my understanding of BIPOC is that it's this like umbrella term, right? So it's like this general term used to encompass like a variety of non-white identities. And so one thing that did come from using this term is that there can be some power in naming, giving a platform for shared experiences, for perspectives from folks who are racialized. And it is a way that we can give a platform for this very wide diverse but underrepresented group that otherwise has not been heard. And historically and currently, like, we're not like, getting to center the experiences of racialized people. But I also want to say that in choosing BIPOC, recognize that this is a term that we need to be intentional and nuanced about, because BIPOC, kind of like what I was saying before, where we're often taught and told as racialized people what our identities are. So BIPOC can be used by particularly white people in white spaces to actually like lump everyone together into one category, and to kind of take all these different non-white identities and really classify them as one, paint everyone with the same brush, which is actually a tool of like colonialism and white supremacy that we need to be aware of, because that assimilates us and erases our unique identities. And that's kind of the opposite of what we are trying to achieve with BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center. So I kind of almost view it as like a tongue-in-cheek way to kind of like reclaim this word, and really like utilize it in a responsible and intentional way to platform folks who have been historically marginalized, underrepresented, and excluded, but also to like really encourage self-identity and representation of like how there are so many different experiences underneath this umbrella of BIPOC, that we're not actually a monolith. We're not like kind of one group. Actually, as racialized people, like, we have been kind of hierarchied and ranked and pitted against each other. And so that's kind of like the way that white supremacy operates. And in particular, like, BIPOC really showcases like the landscape that we are operating within here in the Western world, here in Canada or the United States. So really, like, I find it really interesting. A lot of folks who like immigrate to Western countries will say like, oh, like, I became BIPOC when I came here. Like, I became racialized. Or, I was aware of like the color of my skin. Maybe there was some colorism that happened back home, but really like kind of being faced with like, okay, now I am like a racialized or BIPOC person here. And so I think it's really important to kind of contextualize that this is like the political and sociological landscape that we are kind of working with here in Canada, here in Alberta as well. And so we want to kind of recognize that, and like never blur the differences between these groups, still really like work to kind of center Black and Indigenous communities, and always trying to be like more like nuanced, inclusive, recognize the names, even when we are using kind of a more general term, kind of also being mindful of like naming what it is that we actually need to name. And yeah, kind of striking that balance of like, how do we do that in the name of a center that serves like all different folks who have like shared experiences as well as like different experiences. So I really wanted to kind of use that as a way to like kind of like push back against like what we've been taught and told that we are, and essentially like use it to promote us deciding who we are. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, I just had a few thoughts that came up, but when you talked about reclaiming the word BIPOC for our community, I think that really resonated with me, because when I hear the term BIPOC, and when I heard it in context of this community and just in context of the center, I always just thought of it as, okay, cool, I'm part of this community here. Like, yes, I'm part of the Indian community. Yes, I'm an immigrant, all this stuff, but I'm also just part of this larger BIPOC community. And I think especially for people, who are immigrating, like you said, and they've never been part of a BIPOC community because that didn't exist in their home country. That didn't exist in where they came from. And I've even had people at fairs and stuff say, oh, okay, like, do I do I fall under BIPOC? Am I part of the target audience you're looking for, or that you support? And I'll explain what BIPOC is. And I think if we're able to reclaim it in a natural and authentic and powerful way, then we can provide that community support in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just kind of have that like,
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, you like come to Canada. It's scary. There's like immigration, all these things that come up with it, but you're part of the BIPOC community as well. It's not just your individual community. There's a larger community.
Yeah, I'm really kind of hearing in that, like, there's a form of like political solidarity that goes along with this kind of idea of like BIPOC community. And again, that does not mean that like each of us have been impacted by the system in the same way. It actually kind of recognizes that like, okay, so like here we have like a whole range of experiences. And those are different, in some ways similar, but it kind of recognizes like, wow, we've all been impacted by white supremacy culture here in a way that like we have been targeted, right? And, you know, white folks are also impacted by white supremacy culture, but racialized peoples like have been actively racialized. We've been actively taught and told that, you know, we are
different.
Other, right? We are not the norm. And that's like the whole purpose of settler colonialism here in Canada. And that is kind of what the whole system was designed for, was let's erase the Indigenous peoples who are, you know, who these lands belong to. Let's infiltrate and, you know, kind of paint it in our own, with our own brush. Let's assimilate everyone to fall in line. And then let's like get more folks of color to come over and join this whole machine and be a part of this colonialism and have it serve us, where we're using folks to serve that, like that cause of the white supremacy, right? So it's it really kind of just like maybe speaks to the fact that this is so systemic, and that the trickle down effect of that system have been each of us, whether we are like Black or brown or Indigenous or Asian or, you know, whatever our background is, we have been impacted in some way by that.
And it's, you know, it's so interesting because it's so interesting you talk about the trickle down effect of it, because I think that's where so many people are kind of hesitant. They're like, well, you know, when we talk about words like white supremacy and colonialism, we think more of that big impact in the beginning of what happened and the history behind it. And we don't really think too much about the day-to-day, because we all go about our day-to-day lives. Like, we go about our day, we go to work, we go to school, we have responsibilities, we don't think too much about it. But then you kind of look around, and I was thinking, I watched this video the other day, and people were talking about how, you know, we have Black History Month, or we'll have International Women's Day, and we have these days and these months to celebrate the people that are different. And it kind of gets you thinking, because it's almost like a double-edged sword. Because yes, absolutely celebrate the difference. Yes, you know, when there's a Black model, or you have your first ever Asian model for a skincare brand or for jeans, or it's great. And it's so cool now, you know, getting to watch like Never Have I Ever, and seeing an Indian girl be like an Indian American girl be the main character of a show. But at the same time, you think about it and you go, why is this so special? Shouldn't it just be?
Yeah,
if we're so true. Like, shouldn't it just be, okay, here's another TV show about someone who's in high school.
Right.
Hey, here's another brand trying to sell a pair of jeans. Hey, here's another day that we just celebrate the people around us.
That's so true. Yeah. I know growing up here in the West, especially in Alberta, it was always just predominantly white. Going to school, the majority of people in our classrooms were white. The majority of our teachers were white. We had to like really conform and lose like a part of ourselves in order to feel like safe, and to kind of more of a part of ourselves feel, okay, I don't want to stick out in ways that could potentially bring attention to me that I don't want to deal with. So then growing up in that aspect, and then finally see these small things, these presentations where it should have always been there. Like, we should have always had that representation so that it didn't feel like it's like this big movement. Yeah, but then the reality is like there's still so much work that has to be done, and there's still so much meaningful representation that has to be shown to create that sense of belonging. So yeah.
And that's what BIPOC is about. That's what our center, works to do, is to say like, okay, hey, we should have had this all along. We didn't. Let's like grieve that and heal from that, and let's claim space in a way where we can celebrate our own heritages and ancestries, where we get to decide how we define ourselves, where we have a safer place where we can uncover that and determine, okay, what does that look like for me? How do I want to identify myself? And we need spaces where we can be empowered to determine that, where a lot of times what's been so ingrained is just like, this is what you are an other. And a lot of folks have really had like pieces, again, like erased from them. So BIPOC creates an intentional space where even in the name, it really like claims that space. It really takes up, like, this is exactly what we are doing. This is what we're trying to like heal. Like, we are focusing on this. And to be honest, like, it makes people uncomfortable, even when we put ourselves out there, when we say like, hey, we're BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center, like, folks who are not doing the work squirm. They really like get very uncomfortable because we're so loud and vocal about race in a way that like, we've been taught the opposite. We've been taught to be like suppressed into silence. Don't say anything about this. Go along with things. I even remember like with my grandmother who's in her late 80s, and when she first came into the center here to like see the space and see the work that I'm doing, like, she seemed very shocked that I was, doing this work, that I was talking about race, that there are photos of racialized women on the walls. And it was like kind of this vibe of like, oh, like, are you actually allowed to do this? Are you allowed to say these things, Reena? Like, are you going to be in trouble for saying these things? And that's kind of been the landscape, is tiptoe around, be really small, don't say anything, hide in the privacy of your own home, and go out into the world and mask yourselves and just like fit in and assimilate. And I guess I kind of grew tired of assimilating and really wanting to push back against that and say like, no, actually, like, I can be myself in the fullness of who I am, instead of trying to make myself more palatable for those around me. And I want to encourage a movement of people to do the same.
Yeah. I think like going off of the assimilation piece, there's also this kind of idea of, yes, assimilate, but also just look out for yourself, right? Like, there is this idea of helping people is good, that's great, but do it once you've got yourself set up. And I think the center and everything that you've talked about and all the work that's being done here really shows that, hey, you can be authentic in what you're doing. You can help others while helping yourself. It's not an individual process. Like, it's not a solo thing that you have to do. You can do both things at the same time. And it sounds scary and it sounds like it should be impossible, but honestly, I don't think it's possible to help somebody else without helping yourself, or to help yourself without helping somebody else. And I think that when we're lucky and we're privileged enough in this space and in our generation to be able to say, hey, I can do all of these things. I can show up authentically at work. I can show up authentically at the center and do those things. And by me showing up authentically, not only, am I telling like my little 5-year-old brown self, like little brown girl that grew up in the States and didn't see anyone that looked like me, not only am I showing her, look, you can do this work and look like you, and you can make, Bollywood references as people will laugh and it's okay. But also, hey, you're part of this community and you're not doing it alone. And I think that's the biggest thing about BIPOC, the Healing and Wellness Center, really.
Yeah. I mean, our center really, like, what I've intended it to be is kind of like this love letter to this fusion of the Western individualism and like the Eastern collectivism, right? Like, where, you know, how do we actually like figure out, okay, so I want to come into my own person and my own identity and have my own boundaries, but I also want to be so like connected to and rooted to where I've come from and who my people are, and how do we kind of put that together in a way that really like makes sense for our communities. And so I would say like our approach really works to constantly center and infuse our values. And that's like a key core piece to who we are as a center is when in doubt, when losing our way, when confused, that we have a set of core principles to return back to and to never compromise on. And that's really important because I think what I've really wanted is to stand for something, to be known as people who will protect and support and really like stand for what we believe in and stand for what does like good for our communities, by and for our communities, in listening and learning from community. So I really wanted to just take some time here to just kind of highlight and center what those values are, just to kind of really like showcase like this is what you can expect with our center that we're always going to come back to. And that's, you know, community is one of those core values, right? In terms of fostering belonging as well. Fostering that representation, but not just representation, also liberation, because knowing that representation is not enough for us to be free. And we are always kind of working towards our freedom as racialized people. And so where does that come from? You know, that comes from authenticity, being really like true and honest to like who we are. Really empowering people, that empowerment of you can be who you are here, and we're going to see you and hear you in the fullness of who you are. We're going to work towards equity. We're going to like stand up and say like, hey, you know, all of these intersectional pieces of who you are matter to us. And it doesn't just matter in terms of, you know, when you come for therapy supports or when you access services here, it doesn't just matter when you walk through the door. It matters everywhere that we occupy. So our commitment to unwavering advocacy is really important, where we are going to stand up for what we believe in, and we are going to be vocal about being activists and standing for our causes in order to promote social justice. And that's another key core of where we come from. So I would say it's like these like really kind of infusing, like it's essentially like anti-racism activism work fused with like, you know, culturally informed mental health supports. But the service delivery is not just the only thing that we do. There's like this kind of whole piece around like community engagement. Yeah, it's like a social movement, a lifestyle where we are really like kind of standing firmly for what we believe in, like on the front lines, in the trenches with you, saying and doing what we need in order to like stand up for those most marginalized. So centering the intersectional feminism, trauma-informed and anti-oppressive care. And then most importantly, like really striving towards like decolonization in practice. And that is not a pretty picture. Decolonization is not check boxes and, you know, it's not fluffy and it's not well put together. It's actually really messy, confusing, and an ongoing process, right? And so that also includes like abolitionism, like reimagining like what can we co-construct together in a way that actually really like works for us. And so, yeah, I think maybe like not being afraid to say the hard things, or maybe being afraid and saying them anyways. And that's, I think, the core of who we are.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true. And that's what I feel here is like everyone like shares those same values, and like we really try to like make this a lifestyle. Like we're always trying to find ways to continuously learn and unlearn things. Like it's like how you said, it's a process, and it's not like a change that's gonna happen overnight, but it's kind of like something that we're working towards like every day. And
and working towards it together, so it doesn't feel so heavy, that we're not the ones doing all the heavy lifting on our own, that we can like hold this up together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely, and I like how you even mentioned like the representation, but also liberation piece is so important. I think that goes back to what you were saying, Crystal, too, about how it's great to see people that look like us on TV and everything like that. But then the fact that there needs to be those tokenized days in the calendar where we celebrate Women's Day or this day or something, it almost is like, what's the word? It's like, it's like an extension of that white supremacy. It's like the white supremacy umbrella, and then we are kind of like living under that, which is why we have these like tokenized items where we're checking off, and that's kind of like, we don't want that.
We're like this afterthought, right? Yeah.
It's almost like breadcrumbing.
Yeah.
I know, like, a lot of us have been seeing this term now on Instagram, and we're like, oh my god, that toxic partner breadcrumb. But, like, it kind of is, right? Yeah. It's like, we get so excited, and you're like, oh my gosh, I finally found foundation in my shade. Do you have any idea how I've been searching for 10 years?
Oh my gosh.
Finally found foundation that fits my skin tone. I shouldn't be this excited. Yeah. I should have been able to find it 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Like, this is it. But we get so excited that we're like, yeah, look, it's being inclusive now, which is great. Obviously, we need that. But then at the same time, you kind of think, and you're like, shouldn't we just have this?
Yeah, like
totally,
that we
like breadcrumbing.
Yeah, we don't have to accept breadcrumbs. We can actually demand more. We can actually
the whole slice of bread.
Yeah, the whole bread. Yeah.
A whole loaf of bread. Exactly. Like one of those Cops organic, like all natural baked bread.
The fancy baguettes.
You can tell I'm a little hungry, but right? Like, but we can. You're right. We can accept more, and I think by creating the center, you're demanding more and you're taking more. And no, that's why we made this podcast called Taking Up Space. Yeah. Because we're going to take back, well, not take back, but we're going to take up space. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should have named it Take Up a Loaf or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think this was like such a like great conversation to have. And I really appreciate you like sharing the values, Reena, of the BIPOC Healing and Wellness Center, and talking like having like a chance to unpack that terminology. I think you did a really great job just like outlining all of that. So
thank you for holding that space. And I really want to like kind of circle back to how like in all of this, like this is an ode to like love and rage, right? Where like there's so much love in what we're doing. There can also be acceptable rage in this too, because we deserve more, and we should have always had more. And it's time for us to take up space.
Yeah. And I would almost say all that anger and that rage that we have, like anger and rage that you have in general, I would argue, comes from love. Comes from having love that you don't know where to put it, or not feeling enough love, but everything kind of just comes down to that core value of love. Right? So, and I think be angry, like you were saying, absolutely have that anger, have that rage. It is acceptable, like you said, but also it's kind of nice sometimes to remember that there's a reason that you're angry. Yeah. And that reason can be love. That reason can be that you know that you deserve more, you love your friends, you love the community, and you're not seeing the community get what it needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell the folks that I support, like when we're aiming to do something, always return to the why. like know your why of what you're doing, know your purpose. And there's a very intentional purpose here of like this core root of love and really wanting to spread that. So on the days where things get hard and we're going to be challenged because we're talking about things that don't get talked about, that, you know, all of this has been designed to sweep under the rug. So we are kind of shaking things up. And so when we shake things up and we get pushback, we're turning to the why. And this is why we're doing this. And we're here taking up space.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to our very first episode. We hope that everybody is able to take up space in whatever capacity you can over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in.
If you are interested in further resources and readings, you can find some content referenced in the episode description. If you come across any content you believe should be shared with our audience, please let us know. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We are extremely grateful for your support, and as always, we hope you take up some space however that looks for you.